June 19, 1944. Philippine Sea. The sun burns white across an ocean of steel. Carrier decks stretch like floating cities, each humming with life propellers, spinning engines roaring, the deck crews shouting over the wind. From the bridge of the Taiho, Admiral Jisaburō Ozawa peers through his binoculars toward the horizon. The air tastes of salt and exhaust. It is the morning of what will be known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a battle meant to save Japan's empire, but destined to reveal that its time is ending. Below deck, the crew is silent. The Taiho is Japan's newest and proudest carrier, armored and swift, the symbol of a navy that once ruled the Pacific. Yet Ozawa knows even before the first American planes appear that this battle is not between fleets. It is between two worlds, one that can build faster than it can bleed, and another that cannot. As the sun climbs higher, reports flood in from the north and east. Radar stations detect hundreds of incoming contacts, waves upon waves of American aircraft. They are coming from ships so numerous that their wakes merge into one shining corridor across the sea. These are not the ragged, desperate raids of early 1942. These are industrial storms born from the factories of a continent. A young ensign hands Ozawa a message decoded from earlier reconnaissance. Enemy carrier task forces sighted multiple Essex-class. Ozawa's jaw tightens. The name is already infamous. Essex-class. He has heard it whispered in staff rooms, muttered by submarine captains, scrawled in after-action reports. A new breed of carrier, larger than anything Japan can field, rolling out of American shipyards, one after another, faster than Japan can sink them. He lowers the binoculars. Across the deck, the flight crews ready their planes, Zeros, Judy dive bombers, Kate torpedo planes. But he knows the truth. Many of these pilots have flown only a handful of hours. Their instructors are dead, their replacements barely trained. Fuel is scarce, and every launch now feels like a roll of the dice against fate itself. The ocean rumbles with distant thunder, not weather engines. Far to the east, the Essex-class carriers Lexington, Bunker Hill, Wasp, and Hornet prepare to launch. From their decks rise hundreds of Hellcats, Avengers, and Helldivers, sleek and relentless, painted in shades of Pacific blue. In the skies above, Lieutenant Commander Alex Vratsiu of VF-16 grips the controls of his F-6F Hellcat and the vibration of 6 50-caliber machine guns running through the metal frame. He can already see the Japanese formation glittering in the distance. "Tally-ho," he mutters into the radio and dives. Moments later, the sky explodes. Tracer rounds carve white scars through the blue. Bombs fall like stones from the heavens. Within minutes, dozens of Japanese planes are burning their smoke, twisting into the wind, black ribbons marking the sky. Ozawa watches silently from the Taiho's bridge. The deck trembles as anti-aircraft guns thunder below, but it is no use. The Americans come in endless waves. By the end of that day, over 300 Japanese aircraft are gone. Many never even reached the American carriers. The U.S. losses fewer than 30 planes. The pilots laugh grimly, calling it the Turkey Shoot. But in the Taiho's command room, laughter dies. A fuel vapor leak ignites below deck, a single spark that becomes a firestorm. Hours later, the ship that was meant to be Japan's invincible flagship lies broken beneath the waves. Ozawa survives, rescued by a destroyer, but as he stands on its bridge and watches the flames fade into the horizon, he understands something no one dares to say aloud. The war is not being lost in the seas of the Marianas. It is being lost in the foundries of Detroit, in the shipyards of Brooklyn, in the vast assembly lines that never sleep. Japan's warriors fight with courage, but America fights with numbers, with oil, with steel. And the Essex-class, that endless procession of giants, is proof that Japan's fate is sealed. As night falls, the sea glows faintly with the fires of the dead. Ozawa whispers almost to himself, "So this is what defeat looks like. But the war is not over yet. Tokyo will demand that he fight again at Leyte at Okinawa at the edge of annihilation. He will obey, because that is what an admiral does. Yet, in his heart, the realization born this day will never leave him. The Empire's horizon has begun to collapse. August 1944. Norfolk Naval Shipyard, Virginia. Sparks fly from 1,000 welders painting the night with fire. Beneath the great cranes, the hull of yet another Essex-class carrier takes shape, steel ribs rising from dry dock like the skeleton of a leviathan. The men here work in shifts that blur into one another, day and night, 7 days a week. Somewhere, among the thunder of rivets and the hiss of molten metal, the sound of inevitability hums. The United States has become a machine. In 1941, the Navy had 7 fleet carriers. By mid-1944, it has 24. Behind them lies an army of shipwrights, welders, and engineers, women in bandanas, tightening bolts, teenagers hauling hoses, machinists who have never seen the ocean but build its warships by the dozen. Every month brings a new hull sliding into the Atlantic, christened with champagne and sent to war. The Essex-class was born from foresight. Even before Pearl Harbor, American naval architects at Newport News and Brooklyn Navy Yard knew that carrier warfare would define the next conflict. The lessons of the Yorktown and Enterprise, their successes and scars, had been studied, improved upon, scaled. The Essex-class was the answer, 872 feet of armored steel capable of carrying over 100 aircraft powered by 8 boilers, feeding 4 massive propellers. Each could move at 33 knots faster than most battleships and carry enough aviation fuel to fly an air group for days without resupply. The design was modular, a revolution in wartime shipbuilding. Components could be prefabricated in inland factories shipped by rail and assembled on the coasts. In the words of one engineer, "We are not building ships. We are assembling victory." By contrast, Japan's yards lie in ruins. Allied bombers pound Kure, Yokosuka, and Sasebo. Aluminum and fuel are scarce. Skilled workers are drafted or dead. Japan's once proud carrier fleet, Akagi Kaga, Soryu, Shokaku, Zuikaku, all gone lost to fire and steel. What remains are ghosts light carriers converted from merchant hulls, training ships repurposed for suicide missions. The Americans call the Essex the ship that never sleeps. While one carrier sails into combat, another launches from a shipyard, another returns for refit, and 2 more are already under construction. They rotate like clockwork, their flight decks alive with the rhythm of industry. Back in the Pacific, Admiral Chester Nimitz watches this tide of steel from his operations center in Pearl Harbor. On the wall behind him, a map of the Pacific Ocean, a sea so vast it once defied human conquest, now bears dozens of small red pins, creeping steadily toward Japan. Each pin represents a new task force built around an Essex-class carrier, each one capable of independent war. In one report, Nimitz writes to Washington, "Our carriers are no longer ships. They are platforms of production." It is a subtle phrase, but a profound truth. Where Japan launches 1 sortie, America launches 10. When Japan loses a carrier, America builds 2. The Pacific has become a chessboard with infinite replacements. Meanwhile, Admiral Ozawa, now commanding what remains of the first mobile fleet, reads the same intelligence reports. His staff still speaks of honor, of Yamato Damashi, the spirit of the warrior, but Ozawa is a realist. He was once a believer in decisive battle, the grand clash of fleets that would restore Japan's destiny. Now he understands that such a battle cannot exist. The enemy's strength is not in courage, but in capacity. At night in his cabin, he studies intercepted American radio chatter. He hears pilots laughing, engineers joking, mechanics tuning engines to jazz music. It is not arrogance, it is abundance. He sets down the headphones and closes his eyes. Japan's empire had reached too far too fast. Now it is paying the price for every dream it built on sand. September 1944. A new carrier slides into the water, the USS Ticonderoga. At the ceremony, a naval official speaks over the cheers of thousands. For every one they sink, we shall send 2 to take her place. Cameras' flash bands play, and across the ocean, Japanese submarines receive the coded transmissions of yet another Essex joining the fight. Back in Tokyo, a young naval officer delivers the news to the Naval General Staff. The room falls silent. Someone mutters, "How many more?" The answer comes quietly enough. By autumn 22, Essex-class carriers are active. They stretch from the Marshalls to the Marianas, from the Gilberts to the Carolines. Their aircraft strike Truk Iwo Jima and Formosa with terrifying regularity. The Japanese pilots call them Akuma no Shiro castles of the devil. And in those castles, thousands of men work, eat, and sleep under fluorescent lights surrounded by endless supplies of bombs fuel and spare parts. To them, war is logistics. To Ozawa, it is futility. The Pacific War is no longer a contest of fleets. It is an equation, one that only the Americans can afford to solve. October 1944. The Philippine Sea lies calm again, but beneath its surface, history is shifting. The Imperial Japanese Navy is gathering what remains of its strength for one last gamble. An operation so desperate, even its architects know it borders on suicide. Operation Shogo Victory Operation. A plan to lure the Americans into a trap at Leyte Gulf. In Tokyo, meetings stretch through the night. Cigarette smoke coils through the war room as maps are spread across the table. The Empire's high command debates the unthinkable, sacrificing its last carriers as bait. Admiral Toyota issues the order. Ozawa's remaining flat-tops, Zuikaku, Zuiho Chitose Chiyoda, will steam north to draw the Americans away from the invasion beaches. The rest of the fleet battleships and cruisers under Kurita and Nishimura will strike from the west and south. Ozawa listens in silence. His fleet, once the pride of Japan, now consists of shells. Most of his flight decks are nearly empty. He has just over 100 aircraft, many flown by cadets, with barely 40 hours in the cockpit. The Zuikaku, his flagship, carries the ghosts of history. It is the last survivor of the Pearl Harbor attack force. On October 20th, as Allied forces land on Leyte, Ozawa's task group departs from Japan's inland sea. The decks are eerily quiet. Mechanics perform maintenance not because they expect to fly again, but because they cannot bear to be idle. The air smells of fuel and defeat. Far to the south, Admiral William Bull Halsey stands aboard the USS New Jersey Eyes, fixed on reconnaissance photographs. The enemy fleet is moving north just as planned. He orders Task Force 38, the heart of the American naval power, to intercept. 8 Essex-class carriers form its spine: Essex, Lexington, Intrepid, Hancock, Enterprise, Franklin, Bunker Hill, San Jacinto. Each one bristles with fighters, bombers, and torpedo planes, over 1,000 aircraft in total. At dawn on October 25, 1944, the battle off Cape Engano begins. The first wave of American aircraft spots Ozawa's force northeast of Luzon. Sunlight glints off the decks of the Japanese carriers like mirrors signaling farewell. Pilots dive engines screaming. Bombs fall in tight clusters. Explosions bloom across the sea. From the bridge of the Zuikaku, Ozawa watches the horizon dissolve into fire. His anti-aircraft gunners fight bravely, but the sky is filled with contrails, Hellcats Avengers, Helldivers circling like hawks over prey that cannot run. Within minutes, the Chitose and Chiyoda are burning. Zuiho is crippled. The Zuikaku takes 3 bomb hits amidships. She lists hard to port. The admiral stands calmly as water rushes below deck. Officers bow before him, waiting for the order to abandon ship. He nods once. The time has come. he says quietly. The crew assembles on the flight deck. The rising sun flag flutters in the smoke. A bugler plays the kimigayo. At 14:14, the Zuikaku rolls over bow, rising one last time before sliding beneath the waves. Her men salute as the sea swallows her whole. Ozawa is pulled from the water hours later by a destroyer. He stares back at the empty horizon. The bait has worked. Halsey's fleet chased north, leaving Leyte temporarily exposed, but the sacrifice has achieved nothing lasting. The carriers are gone, their planes lost, their pilots dead. Meanwhile, in the central Philippines, the rest of Japan's fleet is crushed. At Samar, destroyers and escort carriers fight back with such ferocity that even Kurita retreats. Leyte becomes the graveyard of the Imperial Navy. Back in Pearl Harbor, American sailors cheer as news of the victory spreads. Another Essex-class carrier, USS Bonhomme Richard, is commissioned the same week. At the Brooklyn Navy Yard, workers celebrate by painting a rising sun on the side of a newly launched hull, marking each one for vengeance repaid. But the men who have seen the battles know better than to celebrate. In letters home, they describe the endless lines of bombers, the sky so full of planes that daylight itself seemed made of aluminum. We can't lose, one pilot writes, because we can't stop. For Admiral Ozawa, there is no illusion left. Japan's last carriers are gone. But the Americans have more coming. Bennington, Kearsarge, Boxer, Lake Champlain. Factories in California and New York have already begun building the next generation, while Japan cannot even find enough oil to train its pilots. Ozawa records his thoughts in a small notebook. Courage is not the question. The men fight bravely, but bravery without steel is prayer without a god. By the end of 1944, Japan's empire is cornered. The once mighty combined fleet is reduced to a handful of cruisers and battleships, hiding in port, waiting for fuel that will never come. The war that began with audacity and precision at Pearl Harbor has become a slow, mechanical strangulation. The Essex-class carriers now rule the Pacific, floating continents of steel, each one a self-contained world. For every battle won by valor, they bring 1,000 won by logistics. And somewhere in the vast Pacific night, as the Zuikaku's oil still burns on the waves, Jisaburō Ozawa realizes that Japan's defeat was not sealed today, or even at Leyte. It was sealed years ago in the blueprints of American shipyards, in the hum of engines that never slept. January 1945. The air over Tokyo is brittle and gray, thick with the smoke of factories that can no longer hide the truth: the machines are dying. Once the hum of industry echoed from Yokohama to Osaka shipyards, welding aircraft plants roaring the pulse of empire. Now silence spreads like frost. Trains sit idle. The lights flicker even in the naval headquarters. Fuel, steel, and aluminum have become rarer than victory. Admiral Jisaburō Ozawa stands on the balcony of the Naval General Staff building, his breath turning to mist. Below, the city moves in muted rhythm, civilians on bicycles, soldiers on foot. He watches a column of smoke rising from Yokosuka in the distance, and knows what it means: another dry dock hit, another dream sunk before it could sail. A courier arrives with the morning reports. Ozawa reads them slowly, his eyes tracing the cruel arithmetic of decline. Japan's total aviation fuel stockpile less than 3 weeks' supply. Naval aviation training hours reduced by 80%. Shipbuilding output a fraction of pre-war levels. Even bullets are being rationed. The Essex-class carriers, meanwhile, multiply. By now there are 24 active, with more in reserve. Essex, Lexington, Yorktown, Intrepid Enterprise, Hancock, Bunker Hill, Hornet, Wasp, Ticonderoga, Randolph, Bonhomme, Richard Bennington, Kearsarge, Lake Champlain, and others form what sailors call the fleet without end. They dominate the Pacific like gods descending from clouds. Each new raid proves the same point: the Empire of Japan no longer owns the sky. American carrier groups strike at will Luzon, Formosa, the South China Sea. They hit airfields, shipyards, and railways with terrifying precision. And each time Ozawa reads the reports, he feels the same hollow ache. It is not anger. It is understanding. In the early years of the war, Japan's naval victories had come from cunning surprise attacks, superior training, perfect timing. But war, he realizes, is not a duel. It is a marathon run on the strength of an economy. And Japan's economy is collapsing under the weight of its ambitions. On February 16, 1945, the sky over Tokyo turns white. From horizon to horizon, contrails streak the morning air, more than 1,000 aircraft launched from 16 American carriers lying offshore. It is the largest carrier raid in history. Sirens wail, anti-aircraft guns bark across the city. Bombs fall on airfields and factories, flattening what remains of Japan's war production. From his command bunker, Ozawa listens to the rumble above. His aide shouts over the noise. Admiral reports say the enemy carriers are only 150 miles from Tokyo Bay. Ozawa nods, almost wearily. "Then we no longer need maps," he replies. Hours later, reconnaissance planes finally return. They bring photographs showing something that chills even the most hardened officers, a wall of carriers stretching to the horizon, flight decks crowded with aircraft. Ozawa studies the images carefully. Every ship is an Essex. He has counted their silhouettes so many times, he knows them by shape alone. "These are not ships," he murmurs, "they are factories that float." Elsewhere in Japan, workers labor by candlelight, melting scrap metal, scavenging copper from telephone lines. Schoolboys are taught to build gliders for kamikaze missions. Every hill hides a bunker, every village rehearses how to die. But the Essex-class carriers, thousands of miles away, refuel, rearm, and launch again, the cycle repeating like a mechanical heartbeat. In Washington, President Franklin D. Roosevelt meets with his naval chiefs. Charts cover the table arcs of blue spreading from Hawaii to the Ryukyus. "We are building faster than they can shoot," says Admiral Ernest King. "For every loss, 10 replacements. The Pacific will belong to us." By March, Japan's home islands are under constant assault. The Essex carriers take turns like engines in an assembly line. Intrepid strikes Tokyo Yorktown, hits Kyushu Hancock bombs, Kure Randolph attacks Okinawa. And when one returns for repairs, another takes its place. Ozawa watches these reports pile up in silence. His colleagues speak of counterattacks, of divine winds, of new secret weapons. He listens but says nothing. Inside, he knows it is over. The Imperial Navy exists only on paper. Its last great battleships, Yamato, Musashi, Nagato, are moored nearly fuelless, waiting to die. That spring, Ozawa receives a letter from an old friend, Admiral Nagumo's former aide. It reads, "They called us the masters of the Pacific. But the Pacific was never ours. It belongs to whoever can cross it again and again without stopping." He folds the letter carefully and places it in his journal. The words feel heavier than any defeat. As the cherry blossoms fall over Tokyo, the war grinds on. Pilots train for suicide missions. Families dig air raid shelters. Somewhere offshore, the Essex-class carriers refuel and turn their bows west again. In a few weeks, Ozawa will be ordered to sea one last time, not to win, but to die fighting. No, April 6, 1945, East China Sea. The wind is sharp and cold, carrying the scent of oil and iron. Admiral Jisaburō Ozawa stands on the bridge of the light cruiser Oyodo. His cap pulled low against the spray. Around him, the remnants of Japan's once mighty navy churn through the waves, a patchwork of ships assembled not for victory, but for honor. This is Operation Tengo, Japan's final naval sortie. At the center of the formation looms a monster of legend, the battleship Yamato. The largest ever built, 65,000 tons of steel. 9 massive 18.1-inch guns. She was meant to be the Empire's thunderbolt, the weapon to decide a war. But today, she sails without air cover, without fuel for a return trip, and without hope. Her mission to beach herself on Okinawa and become a fortress until destroyed. Ozawa watches her from the bridge, her bow cutting a dignified path through the gray sea. He feels no triumph, only sorrow. The Yamato is a monument not to Japan's power, but to its blindness. The age of the battleship is over. The age of the carrier reigns supreme. Over the radio messages crackle from Naval headquarters, American carrier task forces detected south of Kyushu. The Essex-class carriers Bunker Hill Hornet, Bennington Hancock, and Intrepid are already airborne. Hundreds of aircraft are on the way. At 12:32 p.m., the horizon blooms with black dots. Then the sky begins to scream. First come the Hellcats strafing the decks. Then the Helldivers dropping from the clouds in vertical dives, bombs whistling through the air. Torpedo planes sweep low, skimming the waves, their wakes glowing white. Anti-aircraft fire erupts from the Japanese formation, but it's chaos. Tracers crisscross shells burst too early or too late. The Americans fly with surgical precision. Aboard the Yamato, Captain Aruga shouts orders as explosions tear through the decks. A torpedo slams into her port side, then another. The ship lists. Damage crews struggle to contain the flooding, but the hits keep coming. Within minutes, the sea is boiling with oil and fire. Ozawa's aide stares through his binoculars, trembling. "Sir, they are sinking her." Ozawa lowers his own glasses. "No," he says quietly. "They are ending an era." At 2:23 p.m., a final explosion rips through Yamato's magazines. The shockwave shatters windows aboard Oyoto 50 miles away. A column of smoke rises 6,000 feet into the air. The pride of the Imperial Navy is gone, 3,000 men lost in one instant. The radio falls silent. No counterattack, no survivors to command. Just static and the distant hum of engines, the same sound Ozawa has heard since the Marianas, since the day he first saw the Essex-class carriers dominate the horizon. In Washington, the Naval Department receives confirmation of Yamato's sinking. A clerk circles the report in red pencil and writes 2 words, air power. To the Americans, it is another victory, another data point in a war of attrition. To Ozawa, it is something deeper, a revelation he had felt since 1944, now carved into reality by fire. Japan had built ships of tradition, of glory, of singular craftsmanship. America built ships of purpose, of repetition, of industry. And in the age of total war, the latter would always win. As Oyoto turns back toward Japan, Ozawa writes his report, Operation Tengo achieved no results. The Yamato fought bravely. The enemy's air power was overwhelming. We did not lack courage, but preparation. We did not lack will, but time. He pauses before adding a final line. The fleet has ceased to exist. Back in Tokyo, the news is received with grim acceptance. Even the propaganda broadcasts cannot hide the truth. Children are told to sharpen bamboo spears. Pilots volunteer for suicide missions by the thousands. The empire turns inward, readying itself for a death it cannot escape. But across the Pacific, in the shimmering waters off Okinawa, the Essex-class carriers continue their rhythm. Planes land, refuel, rearm, and launch again, the mechanical heartbeat of victory. The men aboard them joke, write letters, play cards. To them, each sortie is routine. To those below it is apocalypse. That night, as Oyoto limps back toward the inland sea, Ozawa stands alone on the deck, wind tugging at his coat. He gazes up at the stars, the same stars under which Japan once dreamed of dominion. Now they shine coldly upon defeat. May 1945, Tokyo Bay. The war's rhythm has changed. It no longer comes in battles with names. It comes every dawn, Engines over the horizon, sirens then fire. American carrier groups rotate in perfect synchrony, striking Japan's home islands as though running in assembly lines of destruction. From the flagship USS Bunker Hill, Commander James Ramage kneels beside a chart scattered with red circles: Tokyo, Yokohama, Kobe, Nagoya, Kure. "We hit one, we refuel, we hit the next," he says to his crew. "Don't let the machine stop." The Essex-class carriers no longer sail as individual warships. They operate as a single organism, Task Force 58, 4 carrier groups, each capable of total war on its own. The ocean belongs to them now. From the Aleutians to the Philippines, they move with absolute control, their wake stretching like a corridor of inevitability. Every hour, bombers lift from their decks, Corsairs, Hellcats, Avengers engines, roaring wings folding open like blades. On the ground below, Japan's defenses are exhausted. Anti-aircraft ammunition runs low. Radar stations fail. Entire towns vanish under carpets of incendiaries. In Tokyo, Admiral Ozawa walks through the charred ruins of the Naval Ministry. The air smells of wet ash. Files are scattered across the floor, soaked from the fire hoses. Once these rooms had been filled with maps and voices, the hum of command. Now only the wind moves. He bends to pick up a scrap of a report, a damage summary from Kure Naval Arsenal. 2 destroyers sunk at dock. 1 carrier incomplete. Aircraft production halted. He folds the paper, pockets it, and steps into the street. Across the city, the population lives in silence. Trains no longer run at night. Windows are painted black to hide the glow of cooking fires. Each morning, people wake and count who survived. The Imperial Navy that once ruled half the Pacific has vanished from its own harbors. Meanwhile, the American carriers keep coming. From his office aboard USS Essex, Admiral Mark Mitcher watches his pilots briefed for another mission. "They're out of ships," one of them says. Mitcher nods. "Then hit what's left that keeps the lights on." The order spreads across the radio networks. Oil depots, steel plants, and rail lines all targets now. At Kure, where Ozawa once watched the launch of Japan's greatest ships, the docks are littered with wreckage. The hull of the unfinished carrier Shinano lies beneath the surface, torpedoed before she ever fought. Workers salvage what they can, melting brass from shattered fittings, scraping copper from cables. The war economy is devouring itself. That summer, American intelligence intercepts a coded message from Ozawa's headquarters. It contains just 5 words: Naval Air Arm, expended impossible operations. Analysts read it in silence. The words confirm what they already know: Japan has no fleet left to fight. And yet the attacks continue. Between May and July, American carrier aircraft fly nearly 20,000 sorties over Japan. They strike every ship still afloat, every pier, every coastal base. By July 1945, the Essex-class carriers have annihilated Japan's naval infrastructure so completely that the Imperial Navy exists only in name. But to the men aboard those carriers, the sense of victory is tempered by unease. They see the fires below and know what it means. Japan is cornered, but not surrendering. The enemy still fights with a fanatic's resolve. Kamikazes continue to hurl themselves at ships' flashes of light against the steel sky. On May 11th, Bunker Hill is hit by 2 suicide planes within 30 seconds. Explosions rip through her decks, killing nearly 400 men. Smoke billows into the sky. And yet, even as the fires rage, neighboring carriers Enterprise and Hancock launch replacement strikes. Within hours, the line reforms. The machine does not pause to mourn. Admiral Ozawa hears of the attack through intercepted broadcasts. He closes his eyes, not in triumph, but in grief. The men who flew those kamikaze missions were his last pilots. Boys barely trained, their courage wasted on the impossible. He writes in his journal that night, "They still believe in glory. I believe only in mercy." By June, American planes are over Osaka, Kobe, and Yokohama daily. From 10,000 feet, the cities look like maps of flame. Pilots describe it as the Pacific turned inside out. Below them, millions watch the sky and wait for the next wave. In Washington, Admiral Nimitz receives word that the Essex-class carriers are now rotating back to Pearl Harbor for maintenance, the first time since 1944. But their replacements, newly commissioned, are already sailing west. The production never stopped. For every carrier that burns two more take its place. And in Tokyo, standing before what remains of the Imperial Navy headquarters, Jisaburō Ozawa looks up to a sky streaked with contrails' white lines drawn by a nation that never ran out of fuel. He whispers, "We are already ghosts." July 1945. Tokyo is a skeleton of steel and dust. The nights are sleepless, filled with the low hum of engines far above. People no longer look up when the air raid sirens sound. They already know what comes next. Every dawn, the sky turns silver, and another swarm of aircraft emerges from the horizon, the Essex-class carriers still striking like a clock that cannot be stopped. From the coast of Japan, watchers report a constant line of ships stretching to the horizon. To the American sailors, it feels routine now, another sortie, another city, another target. But to the Japanese who remain, it feels like the end of the world, coming one wave at a time. Admiral Jisaburō Ozawa has moved his command to a makeshift headquarters near Lake Biwa, far from the ruins of Tokyo. His staff operates with the barest means, no reliable communications, no ships to command, and only fragments of information from a navy that exists mostly as memory. The reports that still arrive are grimly repetitive. No aircraft available, fuel-exhausted bases destroyed. Outside, cicadas scream in the summer heat. Inside, the silence between the men grows heavier each day. On July 24th, word arrives that the Americans have begun bombing the inland sea, Kure, Maizuru, and Sasebo, the last sanctuaries of Japan's navy. From their carriers, over 1,000 aircraft take flight. Within hours, the anchorages that once bristled with cruisers and destroyers are choked with smoke and flame. The battleship Haruna capsizes at her moorings. The carrier Amagi is struck again and again until she slides beneath the water. Only wrecks remain. Ozawa listens to the field telephone. Static fills the line, then a voice breaks through, "Sir." The Navy has ceased to exist. He thanks the caller quietly and hangs up. A few of his officers look to him for orders, for words, for anything that might still resemble command. He simply says, "Prepare the message." That afternoon, a coded signal is transmitted to what remains of the fleet, all surface operations suspended indefinitely. Preserve lives for the homeland defense. It is the last operational order ever sent by the Imperial Japanese Navy. Meanwhile, aboard the USS Randolph, Commander William Drayton wipes sweat from his forehead as he studies aerial photos of Kure. The black plumes are so dense they blur the coastline. "We're running out of targets," his intelligence officer mutters. Drayton doesn't respond. He just traces a finger across the photographs. Ships that once terrified the Pacific now lie upside down like carcasses on the shore. The carriers themselves, Essex, Ticonderoga, Bennington, Randolph, Lexington, Yorktown, and more, continue their rhythm. Pilots fly 2, sometimes 3 missions a day. Deck crews refuel under fire. Engineers sleep between bomb loads. To them, the war feels endless, mechanical, unstoppable. In Washington, Admiral Ernest King receives the latest production report: 32 Essex-class carriers now active, with several more under construction. The industrial engine shows no fatigue. "We've built more ships than they have harbors left," one officer remarks. King nods grimly. "Then we'll keep building until they surrender or there's nothing left to bomb." But deep down, Even the American commanders sense a new kind of unease. The victories are too easy now, the skies too empty of resistance. The men speak less of glory and more of mercy. In his bunker, Ozawa writes his final entry. We have learned too late that war is not decided by the courage of the heart, but by the endurance of the hand that builds. The Essex-class carriers are not ships. They are the shape of the future. Whoever controls such power controls the fate of nations. Japan has reached the limits of its soul. America has not yet reached the limits of its industry. On August 6th, the sound in the sky changes. It is not the deep hum of carrier aircraft, but something new, a single bomber solitary high above Hiroshima. Ozawa does not yet know what it carries, but when the earth shakes and the horizon glows, he understands that the war's final weapon has arrived. 3 days later, Nagasaki burns. The Essex-class carriers still sail offshore, their decks full of planes that will not fly that day. Even victory hesitates before such destruction. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito's voice crackles through the radio. His words are halting, formal, almost inaudible through the static. We have resolved to endure the unendurable and to suffer what is insufferable. The war is over. In a small office overlooking Lake Biwa, Admiral Ozawa stands motionless as the words echo. The men around him bow their heads. Outside, the cicadas continue to sing loud, oblivious, endless. He steps out into the sunlight and gazes toward the mountains. For the first time in years, there is no sound of engines, only wind and silence. September 2nd, 1945. Tokyo Bay. The morning is quiet, unnaturally so. A pale mist hangs over the water as ships gather in solemn formation, not for battle, but for surrender. At anchor in the center is the battleship USS Missouri, her deck crowded with officers and correspondents. Around her float 100 American vessels, many of them Essex-class carriers, Essex, Hancock, Ticonderoga, Yorktown, Bennington, silent giants watching the ceremony unfold. Their flags stir lazily in the still air. Admiral Jisaburō Ozawa stands among the delegation from the defeated empire. His uniform is immaculate, but faded, the fabric worn thin from months of war. When he looks up, the sight before him seems almost unreal, an armada that stretches beyond the horizon, a living monument to the power he had witnessed destroy Japan's dreams. The gray hulls gleam in the morning light, each carrier a floating city that had never slept. Nearby, General Douglas MacArthur steps to the microphone. We are gathered here, he declares, to conclude a solemn act of reconciliation. His voice carries over the water, steady and absolute. Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always. As the Japanese delegation signs the instrument of surrender, cameras, click pens scratch, and the history of the Pacific War closes. Ozawa does not look down at the document. He looks instead toward the sea, toward the silhouettes of the carriers, those endless decks that had risen from America's shipyards, like an industrial tide. It is then, in the quiet of that moment, that he understands how completely the war had been decided long before the first bomb fell. Not by strategy, not even by courage, but by capacity. The United States had built an empire not of colonies, but of production. The Essex-class carriers were its symbols not of conquest, but of permanence. Each one born from an assembly line that treated war as process, not passion. The Japanese Navy, bound by tradition and pride, had been fighting the last war while America built for the next. Later that day, as the delegations disperse, an American photographer approaches Ozawa. The man is young, perhaps 25, his uniform crisp and clean. He hesitates before asking, "Admiral, may I take your picture?" Ozawa nods. The camera clicks. In that instant, the two men, one victor, one vanquished, share a brief wordless understanding. Neither had wanted the world to become this way, but both had lived long enough to see that it could not have gone differently. That evening, from the deck of a destroyer anchored near Yokosuka, Ozawa, watches the Essex carriers prepare to depart. Their decks bustle again, this time not with warplanes, but with supplies and crew ready to bring soldiers home. The engines rumble softly, familiar as heartbeat. The USS Essex herself signals farewell with a single long blast of her horn. It echoes across the bay, through the haze, across the ruins of Tokyo, a sound as deep and final as history itself. Ozawa lowers his head. He thinks of the men who never returned from Midway, the young pilots who died over the Marianas, the sailors who went down with Yamato. He thinks of the letters they never wrote, the futures they never saw. He also thinks of the shipbuilders in Norfolk and Brooklyn, the men and women who never saw combat yet forged the instruments of victory with fire and rivets. They had been his unseen enemies, and in some way, his teachers. As night settles, he opens his journal for the last time and writes, "They built ships as we built dreams." And their ships endured longer than our dreams could last. In the years that follow, the world rebuilds. The Essex-class carriers, those engines of victory, do not fade into history. They sail on to Korea, to Vietnam, to the Cold War seas. Some are refitted, modernized, reborn with angled decks and jet aircraft. A few are scrapped, but many serve for decades, symbols of an age when steel and will reshape the earth. For Japan, defeat becomes transformation. Its shipyards rise again, this time, building not for war, but for commerce. The ports at Yokosuka and Kure hum with peaceful industry. The same ingenuity that once forged warships now fuels a nation's rebirth. In 1954, a new carrier is launched under the Rising Sun flag, not for battle but as a training vessel. When Admiral Ozawa, now old and gray, reads of it in the newspaper, he smiles faintly. The cycle has turned. He walks along the shore near Kamakura, where the sea meets the land in quiet waves. The horizon glows with the light of passing ships. Somewhere out there, an Essex-class carrier still sails, a relic of the war that defined his life, yet also the vessel that carried humanity into the modern world. He removes his cap, feeling the wind on his face. Perhaps he says softly, "We were all building something larger than victory." Behind him, the tide washes over the sand, erasing the footprints of a man who once commanded an empire's last hope. Before him, the sea stretches wide and calm, endless like the age of peace that followed.